THiNK 2013, there's plenty of think this time, largely because of the state of the economy, the debate around demography, and more importantly, the whole billion people demographic dividend. Is that something that leaves more questions than answers, even to you as you come here to talk about that subject?
I see demographics as, you can see it as a glass half full or half empty. You can see the optimistic side of it, or you could see the dangers of our demographic boom if we don't create the job opportunities, if we don't create the education opportunities, the infrastructure and so on. The reality is it's both. It's both an opportunity as well as a threat. For decades, we bemoaned our large population, which kept pulling the economy down. Then for about a decade, we celebrated our demographic dividend as the economy was growing. I think this new pessimism is because of the sense of malaise that has set in the economy in general and in politics over the last few years. But it's nothing that can't be overcome.
But was that celebration a bit euphoric, possibly based on not enough concrete evidence that this demographic was part of the growth story? I mean, you come from Orissa, and that's really been, the hallmark of big ticket investment on headlines. And most people have criticized that India's growth story was much about headlines of large investments in resources as opposed to people.
No, I don't think that's true. But let me come back to a germ of truth in what you just said. First of all, even if you take Odisha as an example, leave aside the large investment. Look at the socio-economic indicators. Over the last decade, Odisha has had some of the best improvement in the country on malnutrition, on poverty, on education and health access, infant mortality dropping sharply, things like that. So it's not true that the economic growth story has left behind everybody. This growth that we began to celebrate would need to be sustained for 2 decades before it would yield the all-round success that it was hoped for. We often compare to China. Now China has had sustained growth, high growth, for more than 3 decades. We got carried away by 6 or 7 years of high growth. Yeah. And we thought that the rest of the journey was going to be on autopilot. That's not how life works.
But did you feel it, especially after seeing the recent pessimism, and I'm guessing that that's probably going to be your pitch to thinkers as well, is that as this entire piece of demographic dividend plays out, there's need for us to look inwards and find newer models of how we are going to grow as a country, because now again we're down to nearly 4% of GDP growth. I mean, I can't remember a time when India didn't in recent past have a chip on their shoulder with the growth rate in international spaces, and today we're embarrassed.
I think every model of growth that exists today has been around all along. If you look at part of the debate that we are having in India on whether we should have growth or whether we should have redistribution, it mirrors exactly the debate 2000 years ago in Rome between Julius Caesar and Cato the Younger. So it's deja vu. I think we have to recognize that in a large country like India, you can't have reliance on only either. You can't just focus on growth and think that redistribution will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And you can't just focus on redistribution thinking that growth will take care of itself. You have to have a balanced approach. You must recognize that without growth, there is nothing to redistribute. And you must also recognize that without redistribution, you are not carrying a large part of the billion plus people that we have, and that's not sustainable. So any sustainable, acceptable government is going to have to address both equally.
Do you think that's possibly a big missing link in our economic philosophy, irrespective of which government is in power, that we tend to promote one aspect of this growth story than the other?
I think we say the right things, but when it comes to walking the talk, you're right. I think the emphasis shifts, the pendulum swings too heavily one way or another. Go back 10 years, we had the growth story going, and as I've demonstrated to you, enough of the disenfranchised were also beginning to be picked up into the system.
Right.
And yet that disastrous election campaign of India Shining forgot that there were still hundreds of millions of people that were out of the system that needed to be included. But look at the last few years, we've been talking about inclusive growth.
That hasn't proved very much true
it's
either.
It's just talk.
Yeah.
The whole effort has been on how to include more and more people without any growth, or with much lower growth. So I think the rhetoric has always been there, but matching actions to rhetoric has lacked either on the growth part or on the inclusiveness part.
Yeah.
The time has come that we need to find the optimum or the optimal balance between the two. And so far we haven't found it. I think that is the challenge and that is the debate that's going on today.
You know, I want to just draw your attention to something what will be sub-debates of this whole growth debate, which is really the role business community has played over the last few years. Many would say at the peak, of course, the businesses, most conglomerates in India were very positive. They were beaming with energy, going out there to the rest of the world saying, you know, India is the place to be. Today, they're not able to do that, but at the same time, they have this feeling of self-inflicted, government versus business situation, and I think they're trying to go into a shell, even though many open letters have been written. Do you think there's an evident fight between government and business, though it's not good for growth at any point?
I think there's been an unfortunate turning of the clock back. If you remember, for the first 45 years after independence, we had a similar ambiance,
yes,
where businesses in the private sector was distrusted. We had extremely heavy reliance on government finding solutions to every problem, and that was not optimal. And then with the opening up of the economy, we entered an era when the private sector was celebrated for its growth in India, also reaching out to the rest of the world and seeing as world beaters. And we had many cultural heroes that were entrepreneurs, and they began to be celebrated.
Was that overdone?
I think what has happened is, in the last few years, you've seen this turning back of the clock, where I think business also has to recognize that they've contributed to this turning back, because you've seen this great surge of cronyism,
yes,
and that have involved not only fly-by-night operators but some of the more respectable names in Indian business, and allowing even a shadow of doubt to cross your branding means that your fingers are going to be pointed. It's not entirely the business world's fault, because if governance standards have fallen to a level where it becomes not only necessary but crucial to bribe to get access to normal business opportunities, it's a vicious cycle.
Right.
And I think we need to reboot. We need to reboot and start out on a fresh slate, that neither should businesses be treated as criminals to begin with, nor should they be treated as saints. They should be treated as businesses. They have a role to play. They have a role to build the economy. They have to play by rules which are equally applied to everybody. But both governance and the business community have a role to bring about that image.
Do you think that there's been also a breakdown of systems that allow more appropriate and transparent dialogue between India Inc. and the government? I mean, at the end of the day, we don't have a system where India Inc. can go to an established lobbying system and to say, okay, please lobby on these subjects, even though we do have CII, FICCI. I'm not sure if they are always taking on controversy head on. So in that sense, when we see a big politician meeting a big business person in any sort of fora or otherwise at cocktails and dinners, this is something that's looked down upon in the US a lot of late. Do you think India could be headed that way?
Look, I don't think corporate India lacks in lobbying firepower. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the real issue is not that there isn't enough dialogue. You know, in recent times you have seen very senior political leaders such as Congress Vice President having a first ever big meeting with CII and talking candidly about various issues. What has been missing is action following those dialogues. You've seen the Prime Minister's Business Council meeting with top business names. You've had these meetings where I think even candid discussions have taken place, but no action has followed. So that's the point I'm making repeatedly, that the talk is all there, the rhetoric is all there. It's not matched by action. Mostly by the government, but also a little bit by the business community, and that has to be corrected.
So you think that in India, the business climate is likely to remain in this flux for some time, and the concept of the clean business really needs to be resurrected because it doesn't exist today?
Businesses will be as clean or as unclean as the environment in which they operate. A clean business cannot operate in a very murky, corrupt, incestuous system, and neither can a dirty business operate in a system which is transparent, where information is available to the public, where opportunities are equal.
Yeah.
So I think we need to correct the system. I think we've gone too late in the term of this government to try and correct it in the last stages. We've got only a few months left for elections.
Yes.
I think we will need at least one election before the balance is restored. My fear is that we may need more than one election to restore the balance.
Well, that fear should make everyone think again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.